The clinical side of things isn't the only consideration in radiopharmaceuticals. A big part is also the supply and the logistics. Given that you are sort of heading in towards the commercial phase of, clarity, especially with SAR-bisPSMA, can you maybe touch on what the supply, the logistics, and sort of the considerations are as it relates to 64 copper in particular? Thinking about, if you're wanting to take such a large market, are you really sort of prepared in the next 18 to 24 months?
Yeah, it's a great question. Copper-64, if we take a little bit of the characteristics, which is key, and I think very important. When we look at an isotope, the critical part is its half-life,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
Because we're looking at positron emitters, and they're all great, and we do a comparison, and fluorine is a fantastic positron emitter. When we do a comparison to that, copper-64 is up there with pretty close to fluorine when they're just isotopes, and gallium is the worst of all. You know? So, but in the context of a product, critical is the half-life and where you can get that product to and how you can image. The current standard of care imaging agents are 1 hour and 2 hour half-lives. Now, you don't have to be a scientist or a clinician or an engineer to understand that's a massive issue.
Mhm.
Gallium is a research tool that got ahead of itself. Okay. When we look at copper-64, we're looking at a 12.7 hour half-life.
Mhm.
We're looking magnitudes greater half-life with a product. And it starts to build in something really interesting, a thing called shelf life,
Mhm.
which you'd expect products to have.
Yep.
There's very little shelf life to these other products,
Yep.
let alone an imaging window.
Mhm.
So now, and once again, we see the competitors start to worry about their situation and say the only thing important is a 1 hour half-life, 1 hour imaging time point. And that's just ludicrous in any part of cancer.
Mhm.
So what we did, remembering that there's two things that we did with our products. One is, and compared to the others, we built a superior product.
Mhm.
We built the SAR-bisPSMA, sarcophagen chelator, bispecific,
Mhm.
targeting PSMA. And we found the massive increase, 2 to 3 times the amount of uptake in the lesions at that 1 hour time point.
Yep.
But the most important thing we found was that a lot of the product was internalized
Mhm.
and stayed there over time. Suddenly, copper-64 enables later time point imaging, so then we can image at the optimal time as opposed to the limited time.
Yep.
So it's no longer in that context uh, isotope-centric medicine.
Yep.
It's patient-centric medicine.
Yep.
Now that feeds straight into the supply chain. We're very fond of what Lantheus has done. We hate the gallium model. Right? There's too many hands in to make their positions. You have to have gallium generators close to the patients, and we see, like for a company like Telix making so much revenue, not making any bottom line.
Mhm.
There's a lot of money going out, and Cardinal others have that position. Let alone all the mouths you have to feed along the way. Lantheus, we think, have a fantastic model.
Mhm.
Cyclotron generated isotope, even though it only has a 2 hour half-life, they're making very, very, very good margins. All of it transparent because they're making some big acquisitions that we knew weren't going to be successful, but they had lots of money to fund that. We love that model. So on that, we have the flexibility of not having one mechanism of generators near patients.
Mhm.
We have the options of a tiered approach.
Mhm.
And you've already started to see that come out.
Yep.
Right? So the main one is the middle one at this point in time, the main commercial one, Spectron.
Yep.
Number of cyclotron facilities around the US. Just at one facility that we're currently working with now, because that's all we need, can make 400,000 doses of product a year from the one site.
Mhm.
That is the entire market as we're looking at this point in time. We think the market's a lot bigger,
Mhm.
obviously. So, but that's a great starting point. You've seen other manufacturing agreement like Nusano,
Yep.
and there'll be others that come out which are mass producers of copper-64. And then we can actually send that to CDMOs, where more local manufacture and ship straight to the patient. All right. So that's the top one that does the entire of the US.
Yep.
We have a regional one, which is Spectron. And then we're going to have local presence at high throughput, patient high throughput areas. California and sort of the upper northeast in the US are the key areas of that.
Mhm.
But all we need is a cyclotron with solid targetry.
Mhm.
They're easy to come by, easy to find. And so that will be the local manufacturer. Suddenly we're able to not do what the others have done, but have more of a large centralized manufacturer, a middle level of regional manufacture, and then we can have local manufacture for the high throughput areas to cover wherever there's a PET camera in the US. No issues with short half-life, no issues with that isotope supply, then being a major logistical issue. Now, when we couple that with the phenomenal efficacy, suddenly and people say, oh, there's room for everyone in the market. We don't see the room for products that fail efficacy. And when I say that on the sensitivity side, when they're missing so many patients, and we've seen that in Cobra and we've seen that in Co-PSMA, we have the completion of Amplify because there's such a high unmet need. Of even, you had Oliver Sartor on and say that to a group of institutional shareholders, the million men in the US, and a lot of them aren't being served by current standard of care. We want to be ready.
Yep.
We want to be ready to go and launch into that market. We're ready now enough to deal with our clinical trials and to start to build out that commercial component. You'll see some updates from us shortly on how we will go straight to market when it's time for us to be there.
And just on the cyclotrons, it's not just 64 copper that's made on those cyclotrons. Is there enough space to make 64 copper on those existing cyclotrons in the US?
Yeah, so on some it will be, but once again the flexibility. So and it's an interesting point you raise because it's more of a competitor issue for us. The people are seeing fluorine, the market for fluorine, and those two products sort of cannibalizing each other on who has reimbursement or not. Now we've seen Lantheus play the same game that Telix did. There's no innovation in those areas. It's the same product, and they say, oh, it's a different formulation. Well, it's the same product. You're injecting the same product into the patient. You're getting the same outcomes, which is failed sensitivity. But the problem with fluorine, it competes with FDG. We don't compete with FDG. You can make it, just say that it's made on the same cyclotron. You can make it in the afternoon, ship it overnight, and we have that shelf life. We don't have any issues or restraints on that. So it's a different model. And once again, as opposed to gallium, that gallium's been pushing to be made on cyclotrons, but can you you're making a 1 hour half-life, isotope on a cyclotron, then trying to get it to the patient. 12.7 hours is a lot of time to do all that. Great opportunity. People have been making Copper-64 for decades, particularly in the US. We work with one of those groups as part of our clinical trials that have been making it for 30, 40 years.
But there has been some issues previously for copper supply. Has that previously been just due to the lack of attention, and what's changed now?
Copper-64 supply?
Yeah.
There's been no products in the market. So Curium brought a product to market, invested in Icon, now cater to that market.
Yeah.
There was a discussion that the Telix CEO said he bought the entire supply chain of Copper-64, which is ludicrous by every cyclotron with solid targetry. Curium are a good model. The issue with Curium is they use a leaky chelator, so their imaging is less preferred. But we sold them on Copper-64 about a decade ago, and they took to it. It's just their agents are, they use off-patent agents and expecting a good result. That's difficult to do. Copper-64, we're looking to take a very large percentage of the market. Our goal is all of it. So that means now groups who are cyclotron focused, like Spectron and others, focusing on Copper-64 manufacture. But if there's no products in the market, there's no Copper-64 supply. But the making of it has been done for so long.